Fast forward to this week, and it's a very different picture. So Savanta, the Labour lead, has gone back up 2 points. So it's not quite up to where it was, but it's at 14. But we've also had a series of other polls showing Labour's lead growing even wider.
Let me just ask you first, the big story of the day. Is there any data at this stage, any polling that reflects the turmoil that we've seen in politics over Gaza?
There isn't yet. And we know that these types of stories take a couple of days to seep into the public consciousness. But to be honest, I would be surprised if we saw any real movement in the headline figures as a result of what we've seen in Parliament. It's quite a nuanced story. There are lots of sort of complex angles to it. And I think what most people will take away from it is this is Parliament being Parliament, behaving badly, rather than attributing it to one party or another.
That's interesting. Just to take one opinion poll, there was a poll, what was it, about a week ago. The pollster was Savanta, and that showed their measure of the state of play had Labour's lead down about 5 points to 12 points. It was 19 actually at its height. And what people were wondering, is that significant? Is maybe worries about Keir Starmer and Labour's hesitance, uncertainty, lack of definition, is that hurting? Well, there's been another one, hasn't there? What do you think?
Well, yeah. So last week we had the Savanta poll with Labour's lead down to 12. Our poll actually had Labour's lead down to 11 as well. So there were a couple of polls, and we were thinking, gosh, has Labour's bad week with the 28 billion, with the Rochdale candidate, has that started to trickle through into the polls? Some Tory MPs were getting quite excited. Maybe this was the start of the comeback. Fast forward to this week, and it's a very different picture. So Savanta, the Labour lead, has gone back up 2 points. So it's not quite up to where it was, but it's at 14. But we've also had a series of other polls showing Labour's lead growing even wider. So YouGov today, Labour's lead at 26 points.
That's up 2 for the Conservatives, yeah.
That's up 2. We've got Delta poll has the Labour lead at 21, Redfield and Wilton at 23. So that's 3 pollsters this week putting Labour's lead comfortably into the 20s. And I think what will worry the Tories the most is when you dig under some of those headline figures. The most worrying thing, I think, for the Tories is in that YouGov poll, just 33%, just a third of Tory 2019 voters say they're now planning on voting for the party this time around. They've lost 2/3 of their voters.
Yes, it does seem as if the politics is sticking to the course that we thought it was on, and a lot of people out there, a huge number of people out there, they may have just tuned out the whole business of politics, maybe just made up their mind. I did notice, actually it was yesterday morning, a particular poll, not on voting intention across the parties, but it did say that Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House of Commons, was doing comparatively, I stress comparatively, well in who voters as a whole might look to improve their view of the Tory party. Now we're looking at a succession of not very high ratings, frankly, but Penny Mordaunt's was better than some of her colleagues, which was interesting, isn't it? I mean, she's in the front line of the story just at the moment.
It is interesting. It does seem like Penny Mordaunt is having her moment in the polling. So we know that Rishi Sunak's approvals have taken quite a knock. Actually, since the autumn, we've seen Rishi Sunak's approvals continue to tick down. And there was a poll out at the start of this week which showed the gap between him and Keir Starmer at its biggest that they'd recorded. So naturally, attention is turning to what is next. And this poll from Delta Poll is the second poll, actually, which shows that if there was anyone who could improve, and it's stress on improve rather than totally turn around the Tories' fortunes, it's Penny Mordaunt. So there was, by a margin of about 7%, people said she would be doing a better job than Rishi Sunak. And we actually looked at Tory 2019 voters, and we gave them a full list of leadership candidates and said, do you think there'd be a good leader of the Tory party, bad leader of the Tory party? The only one, again, who was above water was Penny Mordaunt on plus 22. Every other candidate with those crucial Tory 2019 voters that the party needs to win back was underwater and unpopular. So she starts any leadership contest after the election with a bit of an advantage with the public.
And you have to wonder, they would have seen those polls in Penny Morden's office, no doubt. One of them was in the Telegraph, which of course is required reading in those Conservative offices. You've got to wonder, did it put some fire in her belly when she was laying into the Speaker last night, taking a slightly more measured line today? But you couldn't help but wonder, could you?
Well, it's actually been a big couple of weeks for both of the two front-runner candidates for the Tory leadership. Obviously, we've had Kemi Badenoch in her row with Henry Staunton and the Post Office. She's under scrutiny as a potential leader, and she doesn't do great in the polling we've seen too far, but she does better than other contenders. So she's just underwater. But then Penny Mordaunt, I think, will have seen those polls, will have known that eyes are increasingly on her as a potential successor, and I can imagine it gave her that boost that she needed today, knowing that she was effectively auditioning for her boss's job.
Now, look, okay, let's talk about her boss, Rishi Sunak. I mean, you say that his ratings now, personal popularity ratings, are at a record low compared to Keir Starmer, and that just took a dive just in recent days. I don't think anything has gone disastrously badly for Rishi Sunak in very recent days. This has got its own momentum. What do you make of it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. In polling, sometimes there's what's known as the strong horse effect, that when someone is doing well, the public flock to them, and when someone's doing badly, the public flock away. So even the fact of someone being perceived to be a winner or a loser influences public opinion. And of course, last week we had two things which I think really hurt Rishi Sunak. One, actually the most important, was the UK entering recession. Let's remember, if Rishi Sunak had one silver bullet, it was supposed to be, I'm going to come and turn things around after the mess of Truss and after what had gone on with Boris. I'm going to get the economy sorted. The Tories traditionally have this advantage on the economy, and that news will have been damaging, not just to the Tories' prospects, but to his brand. You then had those two by-election results in Kingswood and Wellingborough. Wellingborough with that record swing. So I think those two things taken together will have impacted brand Rishi even further. And it's made me think, looking at it, and I've seen a bit of analysis which suggests, we all talk, is the next election, is it going to be 97? Is it going to be 92? Actually, I think it could be a more recent election that we see mirrored later this year, which is actually 2019, where you've got two leaders, neither of whom are particularly popular, but it just happens that one is much more unpopular with the public than the other one.
Yes.
So, Boris Johnson was never that popular with the public. It just happened Jeremy Corbyn was way underwater. And if you look at the gap now between Starmer and Sunak, it actually mirrors that gap that we saw between Johnson and Corbyn at the last election.
Yeah. Well, if we go back to 2019, that was it was quite a result for Boris Johnson, an 80-seat majority. I suppose Starmer and co would settle for that.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, an 80-seat majority would
it's a good working.
Well, it would allow Starmer to get things done and also mean that he could ignore a little bit his left flank. There are about 20, 30 MPs in that socialist campaign group. He'll want to have a majority which is big enough such that they can't scupper so many of the things he tries to do.
Let's pay due respect to the electorate and say no one's voted yet. You don't know what's going to happen at the election. I don't know what's going to happen at the election.